I think in this scenario of a unilateral taco, Iran having some kind of sovereign control over the strait, which again is just an unthinkable thing to kind of consider long term, but that's what we're looking like we're at least trending towards possibly. In that scenario, I still think that oil prices currently, I'm looking at my screen, Brent's just about 117. I think that's still too low. I think that, even though this unilateral taco is bearish or a lower price environment than the boots on the ground scenario, I think both of them are still dire and like a deeply untenable supply situation. I think in the scenario where Iran does continue to control the strait, then we're just gonna it's just setting us up very predictably for the next crisis. I think this is a situation that can't last. Prior to the war, we were having about 100 plus 100 to 120 vessels crossing the strait every day. Maybe we get back up to 50% of that. Then with some of the offsets that we have in the system, like the Saudi East-West pipeline and other sources, maybe we get back to something that's, just a deep deficit rather than a catastrophic supply deficit.
Are you guys tired of winning yet? I'm real tired of winning. Okay, I would like the winning to stop right now. But anyway, gas prices are already sky high, and what we just heard is that the prices we're seeing now aren't even necessarily reflective of how bad things really are. So as you can see in the graph that I'm showing you right now, created by The Guardian, the average price of gas was just shy of $3 a gallon before the US decided to attack Iran, but now it's over $4 a gallon, and that's an increase of 35%. So Kevin Dass, who happens to be an unemployed father of two in Detroit, Michigan, told The Guardian the following: I don't give I'll say crap about Iran. I don't want to pay higher gas. Now, we got to remember what motivated so many Americans to vote for Trump. He accomplished the popular vote. And it was because he kept driving home the message that he was gonna do something about affordability. That his priorities were the United States and domestic policy. Now, I mean, look, politicians love to lie when they're campaigning. You should never just take what they say at face value. You should look at their record and see, what have they done in the past? And luckily we had Trump's first term to look at. And he showed us time and time again that he loved to do all sorts of favors for his wealthy buddies who would pay him off, who would donate handsomely to his inauguration or to his campaign, or who would overpay for rooms at his properties, that kind of stuff. But when it came to average, everyday American people, what did he do? What did he do to make your life better? He cut taxes to some extent, disproportionate.
In this situation, what we're really looking at is not just a regional conflict, but a growing global economic threat. If Iran ends up having any level of control over the strait, even partially, it would severely disrupt one of the most critical oil supply routes in the world. Before all of this, over 100 vessels were passing through daily, keeping global energy markets stable. But even if that number drops to half, the impact would still be massive. What's important to understand is that current oil prices, even though they seem high, may not fully reflect how serious the situation actually is. Markets often react slowly, and when the real consequences hit, the damage can escalate very quickly. That's why we're already seeing gas prices rise sharply, and for many people it's becoming harder to manage daily expenses. The deeper issue here is that this kind of situation is not sustainable. If supply continues to be disrupted, it won't just be a short-term spike. It could trigger a much larger economic crisis in the near future.
Benefited the rich. Some working class people got a little bit of a tax break, but that was it. That was his first term. Anyway, getting back to this story. So that's what Kevin Dass told The Guardian. And I think a lot of Americans are feeling that way today. The stock market made some gains today, but it's taken a beating since the war began. So US stocks are sent to deliver their worst quarter in nearly 4 years. Since the war began, oil prices have surged 55%. Gold has been sinking, which is surprising, and bond yields have climbed sharply. The S&P 500 has erased all of its gains for the past 7 months. And even before the war began, Americans were facing some very serious economic struggles. These are economic struggles that don't just, date back to the day that Donald Trump was elected for his second term. These issues that we have with our economy really began in the 1970s, really began with the financialization of the US economy. But nonetheless, when you look at what Trump campaigned on and what we're dealing with today, I mean, how could you not be furious with this guy? So, in November of last year, the Bank of America Institute found that nearly 1 in 4 US households, that's about 24% of the total, spend over 95% of their income on necessities like housing, groceries, utilities, childcare, and gas, leaving little or nothing left over. That's about 31 million households, or around 75 million people. Those are the people that Trump should be interested in serving. Instead, he endlessly serves the needs and interests of the Israeli government to the detriment of the American people. And I just want to remind you again, we are dealing with record consumer debt. So that means Americans are turning to credit more and more in order to make ends meet. And those interest rates on credit cards are real high. Remember when Trump said he wanted to cap them? Did he actually fight for that? Did he actually do that? No, he didn't, of course. Per economist Heather Long, the US consumer sentiment just fell in March to 53.3, one of the lowest readings of all time. The only lower readings, November, December 2025, after longest government shutdown. April, May 2025, after Liberation Day tariffs, which were also disastrous for our economy. And the June, July 2022 duration during the inflation spike that was the result of the COVID pandemic. Now, I don't know where this is gonna end. I don't really have any solutions because this war is now very clearly a quagmire. It is not an easy war to exit. So Donald Trump cannot unilaterally exit the war against Iran, which has now blown up into a full-blown regional war. Because Israel wants this war to keep going. They effectively want a failed state in Iran more than anything. So if they don't want it and they keep dragging us into this, you also have Iran that doesn't want peace negotiations. They don't want a peace deal. They want to keep fighting. Like the idea that Trump is just gonna be like, all right, we're done. We're just gonna pull out of this and we're done with it. That's just not gonna happen. So the longer this war goes on, the more devastating it is for the economy, which is why every president prior to Trump was smart enough not to allow Israel to convince them to attack Iran. Okay, like I just can't get over the fact that one of the most moronic former presidents that we have, George W. Bush, wasn't stupid enough to do this. I mean, he was stupid enough to do the war in Iraq. The war in Afghanistan was also a disaster. We fought
At the same time, the real burden of this crisis is falling on everyday people, many of whom were already struggling with rising costs of living. In economies like the United States, millions of households are already spending nearly all of their income on basic necessities like housing, food, utilities, and fuel. Now, with gas prices climbing even higher, the pressure is only increasing. Financial markets are showing signs of instability, consumer confidence is dropping, and more people are relying on credit just to get by despite high interest rates. There's also a growing gap between political promises and actual outcomes. While leaders often campaign on improving affordability, the policies that follow don't always reflect those priorities. The biggest concern, however, is that this conflict doesn't appear to be ending anytime soon. As long as tensions remain high and no side is willing to step back, the economic consequences will continue to grow. And the longer this situation drags on, the more difficult recovery will become for ordinary people.
20-year war in Afghanistan to replace the Taliban with the Taliban. Congratulations, America. All those soldiers who died in that war. All the innocent civilians who died in that war. And the crazy thing is that days prior to the war, the US was actually engaged in diplomatic talks with the United States. I mean, the United States and Iran was engaged in diplomatic talks. Now, Iran thought they were good faith talks, even though they had no reason to trust the US since the US pretended to engage in good faith peace negotiations last summer and then proceeded to bomb Iran's nuclear sites. But nonetheless, second time around, Iran's like, okay, let's re-engage in these negotiations. Maybe we can come up with a deal. And Trump attacked again. But days prior to the attack, you gotta remember that the Omani mediator, who was part of the negotiations between Iran, Steve Witkoff, and Jared Kushner, said that Iran was prepared to make some pretty big concessions to the United States, huge concessions that even Barack Obama's administration couldn't secure in the JCPOA. Here's what I'm talking about.
I believe is the agreement that Iran will never ever have a nuclear material that will create a bomb.
So you're saying all enriched material would be shipped someplace else, not Russia, but
No, the current stockpiles that still exist.
the things that are still in Iran.
I think that there is agreement now that this will be downblended to the lowest level possible,
Okay.
to a neutral level, a natural level, which means and converted into fuel, and that fuel will be irreversible.
That would be significant if Iran
very
agreed
significant.
to that.
It is very significant, and I think we have agreement on that.
That would be significant, wouldn't it? That was days prior to the US attacking Iran. None of this needed to happen. But here's the thing, none of this needed to happen if you believed, if you were duped into thinking that this war was really about nuclear weapons. Only morons like Jillian Michaels would think that. This is not about nuclear weapons. It was never about nuclear weapons. It was always about regime change or turning Iran into a failed state. That's what this is about. So until Israel gets what it wants, they don't care how many innocent people die. They don't care about the fact that the globe is suffering the economic consequences of this stupid war. Israel wants domination. And they effectively convinced one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful country on the globe to do their dirty work for them. This didn't need to happen. Look, I get it. Staying on top of the news these days feels like a trap. Every outlet has an angle. Every headline is designed to get a reaction. And if you're only seeing the story from one perspective, you're probably missing most of what actually matters. To really understand what's going on, you need to see how the narrative is being shaped. That's exactly why I use Ground News. Ground News is an app and website that aggregates reporting from across the political spectrum and lays it out side by side so you can compare how different outlets are framing the same story in real time. Take this story about the FBI investigating an executive who resigned over the Iran war. One outlet wants you thinking about the Trump administration and the bigger context surrounding the Iran war, while another wants you focused narrowly on alleged leaks. With Ground News, that difference is immediate. You can compare headlines from left, right, and center bias ratings in just one view. You can check source factuality, see who owns the publications, and get a clear snapshot of how the coverage breaks down across the political spectrum. They also have a feature called the blind spot feed, which highlights stories that are being heavily covered by one side of the political spectrum and almost completely ignored by the other. And that's useful because sometimes what the media avoids tells you more than what they lead with. If you want to stay informed without getting played by media spin, I think Ground News is a really valuable tool. Go to ground.news/TYT or scan the QR code. Using our link gets you 40% off the Ground News Vantage plan. Don't let them shape the narrative for you. See the full picture for yourself.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.
What makes this situation even more complicated is that it's not just about economics or oil anymore. It's deeply tied to politics, long-term strategy, and conflicting global interests. This war didn't just appear out of nowhere. There were diplomatic efforts, there were negotiations, and there were real opportunities to avoid escalation. In fact, just days before tensions exploded, there were reports suggesting that Iran was willing to make significant concessions regarding its nuclear program, concessions that could have potentially reduced tensions and opened the door to a more stable agreement. But instead of moving forward with diplomacy, the situation took a sharp turn toward conflict. And once a conflict like this begins, it becomes incredibly difficult to step out of it. No side wants to appear weak, and each move triggers a reaction from the other, creating a cycle that's hard to break. At the same time, there are powerful geopolitical motivations at play. Different countries have their own interests, and those interests don't always align with peace or stability. Some actors benefit from prolonged conflict, whether it's through strategic dominance, political leverage, or economic gains tied to defense and energy sectors. This is why wars like this often continue longer than expected. They're not just being fought on the battlefield, but also through influence, alliances, and long-term objectives. The idea that one leader can simply decide to end the conflict and walk away isn't realistic in a situation this complex. There are too many moving parts, too many stakeholders, and too much at stake. And while all of this is happening on a global scale, the consequences continue to trickle down to ordinary people. Every decision made at the top level, whether it's a military action, a SANKATION, or a diplomatic failure, eventually shows up in the form of higher prices, economic instability, and uncertainty about the future. That's what makes this situation so frustrating and, frankly, so dangerous. Because even though the conflict might seem distant to many people, its effects are being felt in very real ways in everyday life. And unless there is a serious shift toward de-escalation and genuine diplomacy, this isn't just a temporary crisis. It's something that could reshape the global economic and political landscape for years to come.